Welcome to Over the Target, a Washington Examiner show about investigations, whether it be our own exclusive stories or analyzing the multiple scandals, sagas, and salacious stories brewing in Washington, D.C. I'm Chris Irvine, managing editor, and I'm joined here by investigations editor Sarah Bedford and Justice Department reporter Kaelan Deese. As you could tell by my intro there, I'm clearly out of practice after being on vacation last week, as was Sarah. But we're all back together, and I think it's a good opportunity to get people caught up to some of our favorite pet projects. And I think the best place to start for us is probably with Senator Adam Schiff, the California Democrat, who has been a key player involved in the ongoing Russiagate scandal for going on 10 years now. He's one of Trump's favorite people to take swings at. Schiff has obviously kind of made his life hell for years as well. But the big break in the case involving him, the Russiagate, is there was a newly declassified 302 FBI document this week that suggested that Schiff, who at that point was a California congressman, authorized leaks of classified information to damage Trump. Sarah, going to you first, what is Schiff supposed to have done here, and how much trouble might he be in?
This was a pretty significant revelation from FBI 302 documents that were declassified. These are sort of standard forms where an FBI agent who's conducting an interview, in this case of a whistleblower, will just sort of write down a summary of what he learns from the interview, and that's how they sort of memorialize things that happen verbally for the official record of a case file. So in this case, we have a whistleblower, still anonymous, who was at the time a Democratic staffer on the House Intelligence Committee. So working under Adam Schiff, who was then the ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee under the leadership of Chairman Devin Nunes, who is no longer in Congress. And we learned a few different interesting things from these 302 forms. One of them is that the Clinton campaign had promised Schiff he would become CIA director if Hillary Clinton won. So he had a sort of personal stake in her victory that we didn't necessarily know before we read these whistleblower accounts. Now, this whistleblower claims that in 2017, as the House Intelligence Committee is starting to work more closely with the intelligence community on what is becoming a growing counterintelligence investigation involving Trump, which, as we've covered in other episodes, as has come to light, was completely made up and predicated on intelligence that Brennan and Clapper and Comey had essentially fabricated. So all of this is getting underway, and Schiff calls staffers into a meeting, this handful of staffers, all with clearances themselves, and says, we are going to start leaking some of this classified information to the media because I want to drive public opinion towards the creation of some sort of master investigative body like the 9/11 Commission. And my goal here is to get Trump indicted. And so he tells these staffers, you need to go to all of your contacts in the CIA, throughout the IC, find out what you can learn about Donald Trump in Russia, and then I'm going to go to the media and we're going to leak it. And like, don't worry about it. I'm not going to get prosecuted because of the speech and debate clause, which is a whole other thing we can get into. So this whistleblower, within months of this meeting, goes to the FBI and says, "Hey, I've learned because I was in the room of this illegal scheme to leak classified information." And then all of these leaks of classified information really did pop up in the media. So like this wasn't just a hypothetical. Classified information did get leaked right after Schiff says, "I'm going to leak classified information." What's the other super noteworthy thing about these 302s is that the DOJ and the FBI spoke with this whistleblower at least six times between 2017 and 2023, and they did nothing. They did not investigate really any further. They closed the investigation on Schiff once the statute of limitations had effectively run. And now the question is, I mean, it has a pretty easy answer. I bet you could guess it. But why didn't the Biden DOJ do anything to go after Schiff when they appeared to have him dead to rights?
This whistleblower seems to have been dismissed by Schiff as a sort of disgruntled former employee, as they often are in this situation. I mean, does that pass the smell test?
Well, the whistleblower admitted in these interviews with the FBI that he was dismissed, and he was dismissed because he repeatedly brought up objections to this scheme to leak classified information. And another crucial reason why Schiff's, attempt to downplay this as a disgruntled staffer is that it wasn't just this whistleblower. Included in those 16 pages of FBI 302s is another interview the FBI did with one of this whistleblower's colleagues, a Republican member on the committee, who corroborated everything that this whistleblower had said in real time. This whistleblower also named names of a bunch of other people who were in the room, and that a bunch of other people also felt uncomfortable with this scheme. So there were a ton of leads provided that the FBI could have followed if they wanted to look into this. A big problem, though, is that the FBI at the time was also leaking classified information all over the place. It was like asking a fellow house robber to go like investigate a burglary. So everybody was doing this to try to damage Trump, and it's I think frustrating to a lot of people following the story that we're just now getting this information because the time to get accountability for clearly illegal behavior is over, really.
Um, a lot was made about Schiff getting a pardon, a presidential pardon from Biden on the way out, but it was very specific to the January 6th investigation, and it doesn't cover him for anything else. So does that mean that he could be in serious trouble here?
Well, I'll throw to Kaelan after this because he literally wrote the book on this one. He did a
Yeah.
story about Schiff's legal vulnerability, but there are questions about whether even the January 6th pardon itself is legal because a preemptive pardon before charges
Mhm.
have even been filed is not really a thing. It's something that Biden invented, and there are a number of conservative legal scholars who say even that pardon could and should be challenged in court. I mean, what happened on the January 6th committee is the question that would require such a pardon, but there's nothing in that preemptive pardon that would shield Schiff in this leaking situation. I think that the problem that we continue to run into with Russiagate is that it's been nearly 10 years.
Mm. Yeah,
Mm.
Kaylin, please feel free to take the baton on.
Yeah, notwithstanding the fact that even if there was any less questionable grounds about preemptive pardons, which there's so many questionable grounds about them, but perhaps if Schiff's name was Hunter Biden, he would be in the clear for this type of thing. But I do think that if you look at the Adam Schiff pardon, it is very narrow to the January 6th committee activity, as Sarah was saying. So I don't think that if they're able to put together now that there's going to be some kind of prolonged, protracted conspiracy here. I think that there's a chance that there's statute of limitations, that this could still be within the statute of limitations. I wouldn't completely rule that out of the question, especially now that this is being corroborated by a separate witness. The whistleblower, let's just talk about how much of a problem it is if you go to the FBI and on repeated occasions lie to them or say something that's untrue about this. So the fact that this whistleblower has gone out several different times saying this now, he would be in a world of hurt if everything that he was saying was not true and it was able to be proven, and that everything he's saying is not true. So I don't think that there's anyone out there who would put their livelihood on the limb so many times just to create fake information about Adam Schiff. So I think this is something that the current FBI and this DOJ need to take incredibly seriously because it's unbecoming of me that this is something that would take place essentially in broad daylight. Yet there would be no interest in the prior FBI to look into it at all. It looks terrible for Adam Schiff.
Okay. And shifting tracks a little bit, Kaylin, the another piece of information that kind of came out this week was the newly declassified emails reveal that then Director of National Intelligence James Clapper told top officials that they would have to compromise on normal modalities, as it was called, to complete the intelligence community assessment on Russian election interference. This is despite pushback and warning from the NSA at the time that analysts simply hadn't been given enough time. Uh, so What does that mean here for Clapper specifically, and maybe the prospects of any kind of future grand jury investigation?
Yeah, well, for Clapper, it definitely shows that he had a direct role in telling the rest of the lower intelligence community officials that this is something that we are going to make a change different from our standard procedure of of creating these types of intelligence reports. So we already knew that there was a patchwork of information that was coming together to create this intelligence community assessment that wasn't entirely by the book, especially when it was relying on unverified claims that were alleged through the Steele dossier and other types of information that went into making this. So the fact that we see it in plain words through an email by James Clapper that we that they might need to compromise on normal modalities is something that looks very bad for Clapper as well. And I think that if there was a grand jury that was going to take a look at this, I think that this is something that is definitely going to be a big part of whether or not they can actually get some kind of, indictment to come down. But let's take a deeper look because this is information that was told to NSA Director Mike Rogers, and Rogers had already warned his analysts didn't have the time to fully vet the intelligence that they were being told to produce into a report and that they weren't fully comfortable signing off on it. So we see this statement by Rogers of this hesitation that was here. And this is foundational to shaping the Trump Russia narrative, that everything that went into this creation of the ICA. So obviously rushing anything can affect the accuracy of it. So I think that when you're trying to present this argument to a grand jury, you're starting to put together a compelling series of incidents that led up to this. And I think that that's what you need if you're someone that's trying to secure an indictment to be able to prove to a grand jury.
If I can actually just jump in here. So a different part of the Rogers email jumped out at me. The compressed timeline, was because they wanted to get this out before Donald Trump left office, right? Otherwise, they might lose control of the levers of power, even though they were doing everything possible to make sure that wouldn't happen. But Mike Rogers said in there that, I don't have access to the underlying intelligence here. And if we are going to sign off as an intelligence agency on this conclusion that Russia wanted to help Trump win, and that's the one important part of the intelligence community assessment. If I'm not able to see what this is based on, then we can't sign off. And Clapper comes back over the top and says essentially, we're bending the rules here, and you need to be a team player.
Hmm.
Um, and that is so important
Hmm.
because other documents that have been declassified in this process, including the lessons learned review from CIA Director Ratcliffe and previous emails declassified by Tulsi Gabbard, show that Brennan played something of a shell game with the underlying intelligence, which didn't actually exist. There was no intelligence to suggest that Putin wanted to help Trump win or successfully helped Trump win in any way. That never existed. But Brennan played a sort of shell game by claiming that, well, this piece of intelligence is really highly compartmentalized. I'm going to let this analyst read this paragraph of this thing and somebody else read a different paragraph of a different thing, but it's all so sensitive. Not one single person is going to be allowed to look at all the evidence. And he plays this shell game so that nobody in the intelligence community, except for his five handpicked CIA drafters, can verify what the conclusion that Putin wanted to help Trump win was actually based on. That was never looked at by the Senate Intelligence Committee, which all the Democrats were saying, this is the gospel according to the Senate Intelligence Committee. They didn't find anything. They weren't allowed to look at the underlying intelligence. Obama's own national security advisor wasn't allowed to look at the underlying intelligence. So I think the mainstream media keeps getting lost in like, okay, well, they didn't check every box on the form. They didn't dot every I. They must not have followed the procedures right away. They didn't follow the procedures because they were fraudulently creating intelligence. And so like I think the timeline or like the normal modalities distracts from the fact that like this was a shell game because they had
Hmm.
invented intelligence to depose the elected president. And it's hard to watch some of the media coverage where people try to cover up that fact and talk about, things that don't even matter. Like Russia did meddle in the election. Like, okay, that's not what we're talking about here.
Hmm.
These were hugely significant emails this week from Clapper and Rogers.
Okay, okay. Um, I think just shifting track, I know we're kind of on the clock here a little bit,
Sorry
but
for my rants, folks.
no,
No, this is perfect.
I love it.
I loved it.
The everybody's favorite son, Hunter Biden, is in hot water again. This is less investigative. It's more a sort of recurring feature of what on earth is Hunter Biden thinking. He's in hot water for making some comments about Melania Trump, the First Lady, and linking her to Jeffrey Epstein. Melania has demanded a retraction. Biden, I believe, alleged in an interview that Epstein introduced Melania to Trump, and I think he's based that on some rather kind of flimsy source material himself. Hunter seems to be refusing to back down on this. So, my question is, what's he doing? Why is he doing this?
Well, I can jump in. I spent years of my life writing about Hunter Biden
Yeah.
every day. But I am old enough to remember when Democrats and judges loved the idea of like a thinly based defamation lawsuit and were so stoked when like a judge made Trump pay tens of millions of dollars for denying a rape allegation for which there was never any evidence. So, like, the defamation lawsuit threats are suddenly frivolous and something to be dismissed. Little bit of a vibe shift on the left right now, but Melania Trump could potentially have a case here. And for Hunter Biden, someone who's a self-professed broke, someone who can't sell a painting to Walmart, doesn't have any money, has had to drop all of his lawsuits that he filed while his father was president. It's strange to me to see someone in that position inviting the threat of an actual real legal battle, which he cannot afford financially.
Yeah, you would think that if this gets to that level, then he's in some serious financial hot water, unless he has some sort of benefactor potentially lined up to get dragged into a knuckle down fight with the Trumps in court. Maybe that's what he wants. I don't know. I think let's just one other question, and I'm rewinding all the way to last week when Sarah and I were on vacation. Kaelan, uh, just a little bit of an update on our autopen investigation. I know I saw Anita Dunn, a former senior White
Hmm.
House aide, told House investigators that rather than plead the fifth, actually gave some information, which was that
Hmm.
Biden's top aides decided he should skip the sort of somewhat traditional Super Bowl interview that year in the wake of the fallout of Robert Hur's special counsel report, which kind of portrayed him as being this kind of doddery old man. Do you think that moves the needle at all? I mean, do we think that kind of changes the narrative anywhere, or is it just kind of more? I guess I'm trying to kind of figure out where we actually stand with AutoPen.
So where we stand on this issue is that there's still a host of information that the committee hasn't given us that they've been getting from people who were in Biden's circle. There's so many parts of these transcripts that have just been selectively released to the media, which is in some ways frustrating, but I think in other ways they're trying to make sure that they have all the information put together from everyone that they've spoken to in order to be able to put together a report because not everyone is going to be able to have the same level of intel. And that's precisely the problem. If they were to give Anita Dunn's full transcript or anybody else, Karine Jean-Pierre, who's going to be coming in a few weeks to speak, it would only tell one person's perspective. They're trying to bring all of the people in the Biden administration, all the people who are close to Biden at least, to see if there's something that they can corroborate from other testimony. And so I think that it was interesting that we got this bit of information from the oversight committee or people familiar with the investigation in her conversations that day. We also spoke to a representative for Anita Dunn who only had a slight dispute of the timeline for the consideration because obviously her report wasn't publicly released. I think at the time when they made this consideration to have Biden skip the Super Bowl, but the point stands is that they knew that this report was coming. They knew that they had done the interviews with Robert Hur, and they knew that Robert Hur had some interesting things to say about Biden's memory and his ability to actually be found culpable. Just because Hur was questioning whether a jury might just see it as more or less as a mistake of an old man. So if, and that's referring to his classified documents that he took, when he was still vice president. So I think it's interesting because it shows here's something that at the time we were told that the Biden administration was only going to skip the Super Bowl because people in America care more about football than they do seeing the president, even though it's a tradition for the president to give an interview. So they did not tell the truth whenever it came to the reasoning for skipping the Super Bowl. And now we know more information is that it pertained to this damaging report from Special Counsel Hur.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're going to take a break there. And then for the second half of this week's show, we're going to introduce Mia Cathell, our investigative reporter, and she's going to be talking about a fascinating series that she's done this week on Antifa. Hello and welcome back. And we're joined by a special guest this week, one of our investigative reporters at the Washington Examiner, Mia Cathell, who has done a really fascinating series of stories this week for us on Antifa. It's a subject that we've written about on and off over the years, particularly, I think, during the 2020 summer riots. And anytime there's any sort of disturbance that bubbles up, they seem to be on the scene. But I think there's a lot of misconceptions about Antifa. That's part of the reason we wanted to do this series. And I think by design, Antifa is this sort of decentralized left-wing movement of resistance networks. But in recent years, we've seen them become highly organized and increasingly sophisticated. And hopefully, this series of stories that Mia's written is designed to kind of lay that out. But I'll throw it over to you, Mia, and perhaps you could just kind of talk us through Antifa, what it is, what we know about it, maybe what some of the common misconceptions are, and if there's any kind of major takeaways you've had from your series.
Yeah, so I think the public still has a pretty primitive understanding of what Antifa is. Like you said, by design, it's decentralized, it's diffuse, purportedly leaderless, amorphous, anonymous, and that's all to conceal their crimes from law enforcement detection. And that also adds an aspect of plausible deniability that they're not an organized movement, but there are cohorts coalescing in major Democratic-led cities all across the country. Some of them have been in existence since the 2000s. Others belong to larger networks. They're actually accredited or recognized by a certain governing body within this activism sector. And so we've seen this ideology become an organized criminal network, or dare I even say enterprise. So that's something that's picked up the pace since 2020, now that we're into the second Trump presidency.
Why do you think, Mia, it has been dismissed by the left and maybe the legacy media over the years as being this kind of right-wing boogeyman? It feels, as someone coming to it somewhat fresh, it took years for it to really be kind of taken seriously. Why do you think that is?
Yes, I think Antifa deniers have created this kind of mythos surrounding Antifa that it's just an amorphous threat existing in the minds of conservative alarmists. But American communities, especially in riot-torn Portland and Seattle, have seen for themselves firsthand this kind of destruction during the nightly riots in Portland, especially around the federal courthouse. There was the establishment of CHOP or Chaz. That was the occupation protest or autonomous zone. It was a 6-block commune in Seattle when they took over the Capitol Hill neighborhood. And so I think for everyday Americans, just seeing this physical, real life threat, that it's not just ideological gatherings on social media, it's pouring out into the streets.
Okay. And then in your series, you specifically write about two tactics when it kind of comes to taking on Antifa or holding them to account. And one of them would be designating them a domestic terrorism group. And a second one that you focused on would be to pursue RICO charges. So I'm curious, are these options in legitimate play here, and what sort of problems and pushback could they both be faced with? Perhaps we could start with the domestic terrorism angle.
Yes, so with designating a domestic group as a domestic terrorism threat, that's something not just applying to Antifa, but any other domestic group in the US just isn't plausible. There's no legal framework for that, whether through the State Department, which of course deals strictly with foreign actors, or through bringing some kind of criminal punishment to designating such a group as one. Mostly because it's a slippery slope. It depends on, administration, and the next administration could easily dub a conservative group a domestic terrorist. And so I think I've seen observers on both sides of the aisle raise concerns through due process, First Amendment protected speech. It comes down to persecuting and prosecuting political opponents. But that's to say that, as the federal statute stands, these departments, whether it's Homeland Security or DOJ, can still declare it. It's just declarative. It's just a proclamation, but it still sends a strong message to the public.
And there's this specific case in Texas. Could you explain a little bit more about that and the background there, and how that might be kind of treated as domestic terrorism?
Yes, so in Texas, on July 4th, there was this planned ambush on the ICE detention facility in Alvarado. This newly formed faction, it appears, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area emerged about a dozen or so Antifa militants descended on this detention facility. They lured out law enforcement, which were actually just correctional officers contracted with DHS. And then they started shooting at them from various vantage points, multiple gunmen allegedly positioned in the nearby woods. And this is something that's showing that Antifa is more than just nightly riots now. It's coordinated, it's sophisticated, and it's kind of paramilitary warfare. It's guerrilla-like tactics. And that's something that definitely changes the threat assessment landscape.
Um, okay, I will open it up to Kaelan and Sarah in a sec. I just have one more question just to circle back on your focus on the RICO charges. Now, could you maybe explain a little bit more about how that might be an effective tactic?
Yes, so RICO case is built on predicate acts, and most of them are the traditional uh, money laundering, embezzlement, what the public would think of mob movies, crime bosses, white collar crime. But there's also more violent crimes such as murder, such as arson, and that the latter is a typical Antifa tactic for destroying government property. And some of the legal experts that I spoke to said that RICO isn't the end all be all either. You can bring forth conspiracy charges regardless. Interestingly, Senator Ted Cruz has introduced an amendment to the RICO statute that would add rioting specifically as a predicate act. So it's specified in the statute, and that can be used then as a legal mechanism to go after the funders of these uprisings.
Okay. Sarah, I think you maybe have a question.
I did, and this is maybe a little bit outside of the scope of your series, Mia, so I guess this would be putting on your political analyst hat. But when there has been episodes of violence with fringe groups on the right or that align with the right, like, I mean, January 6th is an extreme example, Proud Boys, what happened in Charlottesville, Republicans have been made to be politically liable for that unrest, and mainstream Republican politicians have been made to have to answer for that. Why do you think it is that we have what's clearly a growing and seemingly far more ubiquitous problem of violence with these groups that are affiliated with the left, but you don't see Democrats being held politically liable for what's happening?
I would say it's definitely, unequal application of that incitement question. And then, the Democratic Party on that side would then negate it with, I'm not responsible for these kinds of fringe groups, and how that ideology festers. I think it's important for both sides to continue to call each other out when there's direct, get to the streets. I want to see more action in the streets, and majority of the public can see those kind of thinly veiled attempts to incite something much more violent than just constitutionally protected protest. So I think, especially with the anti-ICE riots, that the landscape is changing and how we have to continue to just call outs on both sides.
Yeah, I had one question about what you uncovered about Antifa's use of propaganda and symbolism, if you found anything on that front. One of the things that I noticed was they prominently tend to use the logo or the symbol that I think originated in the 1930s, like the three arrows, that is supposed to be sort of like a symbol, like against like Nazism, like anti-fascism, stuff like that. I think I even saw former President's son, Hunter Biden, wearing a hat with that three arrows symbol on it. So it's kind of interesting how they try to co-opt some of these like old symbols, because obviously you see something like that and you think to yourself like, oh, that is just standing up to tyranny, or so to speak. But we obviously know that the actions and the things that we do in the night in places like Portland are the complete opposite, and they're the ones causing much of the tyranny against the people who are just trying to live there and be peaceful citizens. So like, how did they use these types of symbols to try to make their movement seem less sinister, so to speak?
Yes, this imagery is certainly intentional. It is to harken back to what could be considered, a laudable affront to Nazi-controlled Germany. And for the public, they have to definitely understand that they're anti-fascist in name only. Ironically, a lot of their actions are fascist in nature, Antifas, that they're trying to uh, quash political dissent, silence political opponents, intimidate them. They dox them, which is an intimidation tactic, publishing private information. And those are used as calls to action, which among Antifa circles, it's called direct action. And they believe that's the only way to bring about the revolution. It will be appearing outside a victim's house, anything there that escalates it more than just kind of a broad call to appear in the streets.
Hmm, fascinating.
Mia, one last question before we can let you go. You've covered Antifa for a long time, not just obviously this series, but in your kind of previous stops as well. Is there anything on the horizon that you're keeping tabs on, or anything in particular that you can maybe see as maybe the next sort of shoe to drop in this, or is there something that's just kind of upcoming in the diary that you're particularly interested in?
Yes, I'm not sure if others have been following the Trantifa death cult called the
Hmm.
Zizians, which is really kind of mind-boggling because of how insane the case sounds. It's this transgender Antifa cohort known as Trantifa, and they're named after the alleged ringleader, and their kill count is allegedly up to six fatalities, including a Border Patrol agent in Vermont. This all emerged earlier this year. More details are coming to light, and some members have been federally charged so far. And I think that shines a spotlight on how intersectionality has helped Antifa reach farther corners of the political spectrum. We're seeing it with the anti-ICE uprisings that opposing immigration enforcement aligned with Antifa's agenda of destabilizing the so-called oppressive U.S. institutions. And so I think these cells, not just the one in Texas, this Trantifa one, are something that we should definitely keep our eyes peeled for. Um, and that's definitely just changing the movement as we've seen it before.
Okay, yeah, I remember when that first came out, it almost sounded like sort of fan fiction in many ways, but it's very real and very scary. Okay, well, look, me, I don't want to take up any more of your time here. I appreciate you hopping on and talking us through the series. I'm sure we'll have you on again to discuss future investigative work. But in the meantime, I appreciate it, and thanks for stopping by. Okay, and join us next week for delving into multiple other subjects, whether it be our usual passion projects of the autopen investigation or Russiagate or anything and everything in between. We'll see where the week takes us, but thanks for joining.